さて、今回の探求へようこそ。今日はですね、あなたが共有してくださった資料群をもとに、右翼左翼という言葉、これがどう変わってきて、特にネットなんかでどう使われているか、そしてそれが日本の言論とか政治の状況にどう影響しているかというあたりを掘り下げていきたいと思います。いや、非常に興味深い分析でしたね。
そうですね。言葉の定義の歴史的な背景から始まって、今のネットスラングとしての使われ方、それから国際比較、さらには日本の政治がなぜ変わりにくいと言われるのか、その構造まで、多岐にわたる視点が示されてました。あなた自身の気づきなんかも書かれていて、非常に示唆に富む内容でしたね。
そうなんですよ。これ単なる言葉の問題じゃないんですよね。あなたが日々感じてるかもしれない社会がなんか分断されてる感じとか、政治に対するもどかしさみたいなもの。
はい。
それにも深く関係してくるテーマだなと。なので、この探求で、なぜネトウヨとかパヨクみたいなそういうラベルがこんなに飛び交うのか、その背景にあるちょっとした思考の罠とか、社会の構造、そしてそれがあなた自身にどう影響し得るのか、その核心に迫っていけたらなと。きっと、そういうことだったのかって思える発見があるんじゃないかなと。では早速、言葉のズレっていうところから見ていきましょうか。
はい。まず基本として資料にもありましたけど、右翼左翼って、もともとフランス革命の時の議会の座席ですよね。
座席配置。
保守派が右で、革新派が左に座ったっていう、変化に対する姿勢の違いを示す、ある種の座標軸みたいなものだったわけですね。
それが、現代の日本、特にネット空間では、どういうふうに変わってきちゃってるんでしょうか。
ここが、かなり重要なポイントで、あなたが共有してくださった分析では、それがもうネトウヨパヨクといったような、極めて感情的で、相手を貶めるためのラベルとして使われていると。
ラベル。
つまり、本来の政治思想のスタンスを示す座標軸じゃなくて、相手への敵意とか、あるいは、こいつは仲間か敵か、みたいなそういう所属意識を示すための符丁、ラベルになっちゃってるってことですね。思想の中身云々じゃなくて。
なるほど。思想の議論じゃなくてただのラベル貼りですか？
そういう側面が強いと。
で、これが、じゃあなぜ問題なのかっていう点ですが、あなたが資料に書き留めていた個人的な経験、倫理とか現代文の授業で二項対立の思考パターンに気づいたって話がありましたよね。
ありましたね。あれがこの問題とどうつながってくるんでしょう。これ非常に重要なつながりだと思うんですね。あなたが気づいた物事を単純に善か悪か、敵か味方かみたいに分けちゃう思考。これがまさにネット上のいわゆる左右の応酬の中ですごく増幅されているんじゃないかと資料は分析してるんです。
なるほど。
複雑な社会の問題を無理やり単純化して、あいつらが悪い、こっちが正しいっていうその不毛な対立を生み出しやすい。こうなると建設的な対話ってもう難しくなりますよね。あなたの提案にあった倫理教育が大事なんじゃないかっていうのも多分この文脈ですよね。
その二項対立の罠がさらに大きな構造にもつながっていく資料の中にあったあなたの鋭い問いかけなんですけど、この国民同士が対立しちゃってる状況っていうのがもしかしたら政権与党とか現状維持を望む層にとっては都合がいいんじゃないかっていう視点、これはどう考えたらいいんでしょうか。
陰謀論とまでは言わないまでも資料が示唆していたのは、国民が互いにレテルを貼り合って攻撃し合うことでそっちにエネルギーが向かっちゃうと。そうすると政治とか社会のもっと根本的な問題、例えば政策決定のプロセスとか格差の問題とか、そういうものへの関心とか批判が薄れてしまうという構造が存在する可能性があるということですね。
なるほど。結果的に。
結果的に大きな変化を望まない勢力にとって有利な状況が生まれやすくなっているんじゃないかと。教育とかメディア報道のあり方なんかも無意識のうちにこの構造を補強しちゃってる面があるかもしれないという指摘もありましたね。
それは根深いですね。で、この日本の状況を世界的に見るとどうなのかっていう国際比較の視点も資料にはありましたよね。
これはかなり手厳しい分析でしたね。市民がその政治の仕組みとか争点をちゃんと理解して主体的に関わる能力、いわゆる政治リテラシーですね。それとか政治家の議論とか演説の質。 こういう点で他の先進国と比べると日本の水準は残念ながらかなり低いんじゃないかと。政治についてそもそも語ること自体がタブー視されるような社会の空気とか、あるいは表層的で本質に迫らないメディア報道とか、いろんな要因が複合的に作用して、世界でもちょっと類を見ないくらい政治が変わりにくい国になってしまっているのではないかと。
変わりにくい国。
静かな支配なんていう表現を使っている分析もありました。
その変わりにくさがまさにあなたが感じている閉塞感の大きな背景にあるかもしれないということですね。いや、これだけ根深い構造とか問題を見せつけられると、資料の最後に触れられていたあなたのもうどうでもええわって気持ち、正直なんかわからなくもないなと。
それは投げやりっていうことではなくて、真剣にこの問題と向き合ったからこそのある種の燃え尽きというか不老感なのかもしれないですね。資料もその感情自体を別に否定的に捉えているわけではなくて、むしろこの問題の深刻さに対する自然な反応として受け止めているようでした。その感情を持つこと自体があなたが思考停止してない証だとも言えるかもしれませんね。
今回の探究をざっと振り返ってみると、有力左翼という言葉が本来の意味からちょっと離れてしまって、ネット上では特に感情的なレッテルとして消費されている現状があると。その背景には私たちの思考を単純化させやすい二項対立の藁があって、でそれが政治的な無関心とか停滞を招きやすい社会構造と結びついて、結果的に国際的に見てもちょっと得意な変わりにくい国としての日本の姿を形作っている。非常に複雑な構造が見えてきましたね。
そうですね。レッテルが思考を止めてしまって本質的な議論を難しくする。で、政治に関心を持つこと自体がなんとなく阻られるような空気もある。そして変化を阻むちょっと見えにくい大きな向上がある。これを前にすると無力感を覚えてしまうのも無理はないのかもしれませんね。共有していただいた資料全体を通してその根深さみたいなものがすごく浮き彫りになった感じがします。
ただですね、最後に一つあなたに問いかけてみたいなと思うんです。これだけ根深くて変わりにくいって感じる構造の中で、あなたが抱いたこれはおかしいとか、あるいはもうどうでもいいわっていうその複雑な感情、その感覚そのものをもし出発点にするとしたら、あなたにとって日常の中でできるほんの小さな一歩でもいいんですが、どんなことが何か意味を持つと思われますか？
Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to truly being well informed. Today, we're diving into two words that you hear constantly. They dominate headlines, they spark huge debates online especially. Right wing and left wing. They get thrown around all the time, often with, a lot of heat, but maybe not so much light. What do they really mean? And how did the original ideas get so, twisted?
Yeah, it's a really important question.
So our mission today is to kind of peel back those layers. We want to trace these terms back to where they actually started, follow their pretty complex journey, especially how they evolved uniquely in Japan.
Right.
And then look at the impact, the real impact their misuse has on society, on political understanding, and maybe even on how you think about things yourself.
Definitely.
You might be surprised by some of the insights into how these labels get used globally and what that means for, just being politically aware. So let's dig in.
Okay. So to understand where things went, sort of off the rails, we really have to go back to the beginning. Right wing and left wing. They're fundamentally historical, political, ideological terms.
Okay.
Their story starts way back in the 18th century French Revolution. If you can picture the National Assembly there, it was literally about where people sat.
Just physical seating.
Exactly. Those who wanted to keep the monarchy, the established order, they sat on the right side of the president.
The conservatives.
Gotcha. The right side?
And then those who wanted radical change, a republic, revolution, they took their seats on the left.
The revolutionaries on the left.
Yeah.
Simple as that initially.
Pretty much. And from that simple seating arrangement, distinct sort of core values started to gather around these terms.
Okay, like what?
So the right wing, traditionally, it emphasizes things like tradition, order, the nation, religion, nationalism. Economically, you often see support for capitalism, free markets, maybe sometimes state protection for industry.
Politically, the focus tends to be on the state strength, the military, the traditional family, morality. Now, if you look at Japan, historically, These values connect to conservative parties like the LDP, state Shinto historically, and groups wanting to maintain tradition.
Right, maintaining the status quo in a sense.
Largely, yes. Then you have the left wing. This side typically champions equality, progress, individual freedom, often aiming to dissolve class structures.
Okay.
Economically, you see more focus on socialism, redistribution of wealth, public good, social welfare. Politically, priorities are often citizen freedoms, minority rights, separation of church and state.
And in Japan?
In Japan, traditionally, this aligned with parties like the Socialist Party, the Communist Party, groups backing the post-war peace constitution, labor movements, civil rights movements, that kind of thing.
Okay.
But here's a really crucial point. In their original meaning, these terms weren't about good or evil. They were fundamentally about different views on how much change society should have. Stability versus transformation, really.
That's a huge difference from how they're often used now. So that's the history, the sort of political science definition.
Right.
But then we jump to today, and these terms, they're not just changed, they feel weaponized. Especially in Japan's online culture, which can be, well, pretty intense.
Oh, absolutely. It's like the internet took these nuanced concepts and just made them into blunt instruments.
Yeah. Like Netuyo, for instance, literally net right wing. This isn't really about 18th century conservatism, is it?
Not at all. It typically describes people online who really emphasize the emperor, the flag, often show real hostility towards China and Korea, support military expansion.
And the language they use.
Very harsh labels, yeah.
Right.
Anti-Japan, traitor, Zainichi, used in a derogatory way against people of Korean descent.
Okay.
And they often react very, very strongly to criticism.
Okay. And on the other side, Payoku. Net left wing.
Online, these folks are often associated with anti-war views, pro-constitution, anti-nuclear power, concerns about environment, human rights, discrimination.
The labels thrown at them can be just as nasty.
Exactly. Things like racist, discriminatory hate speech. This group also tends to be very critical of power structures, sometimes digging into opponents' past comments, looking for hypocrisy.
So the real problem here seems to be that these online labels are almost completely detached from those original ideologies we talked about.
Precisely. They're driven much more by emotion, by a kind of tribalism, creating this us versus them, enemy versus ally dynamic. It just shuts down any real conversation.
The meaning gets stripped away and it just becomes a badge or maybe a weapon.
Yeah, exactly. Which leads to the question, why does this happen? Why do terms degrade like this?
Good question.
Well, often it starts with how the media labels things. Even statements that are pretty neutral politically can get slapped with a leftist or rightist tag, right? Which shapes how people see it, regardless of the actual substance.
A kind of shorthand.
It is. Yeah. And then you add social media into the mix. Conflict just goes viral much more easily than, say, thoughtful discussion.
Definitely. Anger gets clicks.
It does. So words become weapons. The goal isn't really to persuade. It's often to dominate, provoke, get a reaction. And crucially, there's this culture of prioritizing a quick label, a position, over understanding the actual ideology behind it.
So instead of engaging with the idea, you just slap a label on the person.
Okay. Oh, that's just Netuyo, or that's typical Payoku. It's a shortcut that completely bypasses any real thinking or engagement.
Okay, so we have the original meanings and then this modern, often toxic online usage. Let's focus on Japan's specific journey here. These ideas, right and left, they weren't native to Japan, were they?
No, absolutely not. They're fundamentally imported concepts.
Right. You can trace them from France, spreading through Europe, and then eventually landing in Japan during the Meiji and Taisho periods, as Japan was actively adopting Western political systems and ideas.
And what's really interesting is how they got, well, Japanized, localized. They didn't just get adopted wholesale. They intertwined with unique, pre-existing Japanese elements.
What kind of elements?
Things like kokushu-shugi, this kind of ultranationalism, emphasizing Japan's uniqueness, Confucian morality, the whole emperor system, the traditional family structure. These were already deeply embedded.
So the imported labels got filtered through this existing Japanese context.
Exactly. So the Japanese right wing, for example, became strongly linked with reverence for the emperor, the military, Shinto, especially state Shinto. Very different focus than, say, French and conservatives initially. And the Japanese left wing got tied up with post-war democracy, the peace constitution, anti-war feelings, different strands of liberalism, including Marxist ideas.
So same labels, but carrying distinctly Japanese meanings and historical baggage.
Precisely. It created a very different kind of political spectrum.
That makes sense. So how did we get from those specific Japanese political positions to the internet slang we see now? Let's trace that timeline a bit.
Right. Well, pre-war and during the war, these terms were deadly serious. They represented real, often dangerous political stances.
Right, not slang at all.
Not at all. You had the state nationalist right in power and the communist left being heavily suppressed. It was about survival, fundamental fights over the nation's direction.
Okay, then after the war, up to maybe the 70s.
Right. The post-war era, the Cold War context really solidified this left versus right dynamic. You had the socialist and communist parties as the clear left, opposing the LDP and various nationalist groups on the right. Student movements like the Zengakuren brought left-wing ideas right into the mainstream public conversation. But at the same time, you had the image of the street right-wingers, you know, the black vans with large speakers.
Yeah, the Uyoku Dantai.
Right. That cemented a very specific, often violent and extreme image in the public mind. So arguably, this is where we see the beginnings of a kind of slang-like use, associating the terms with specific visible groups rather than just pure ideology.
Okay, so the seeds were sown then the internet arrives, 90s, 2000s.
Exactly. The rise of platforms like 2Channel, Nikoniko. This is where Netuyo really emerges, around 2004 or so. And then Payoku follows later, maybe in the 2010s.
And now, with Twitter X and everything.
It's just intensified massively. Any opinion you express online can instantly get you labeled. Substantive discussion gets drowned out by these label battles.
So it shifted from expressing a thought or a position
to just using inciting words or slang. The main goal in many online interactions seems to be just enemy recognition, not understanding. It's a huge shift in how politics is discussed, or maybe not discussed.
A fundamental breakdown in communication almost.
You could say that.
Okay, so that's a really detailed look at Japan's specific path, but it makes you wonder, do these concepts, right and left, exist everywhere, globally?
Oh, absolutely. The short answer is yes. The exact words might change, but pretty much all democracies, and even some non-democracies, operate on some kind of underlying conservative versus reformist spectrum.
So that basic tension is universal.
It seems to be. Every society grapples with keeping things as they are versus pushing for change. The terminology differs, of course. Germany uses links and rechts.
Left and right.
The U.S. talks more about liberal and conservative. Those have their own complicated meanings. France still uses gauche and droit.
The originals.
Right. And even in places like China or Russia, while it's not open, you often see internal factions that kind of align with left or right tendencies in terms of policy preferences. The core dynamic is there.
Okay, so if the dynamic is global, is Japan unique in having this really intense online slang and polarization? Or is this happening everywhere?
Unfortunately, Japan is definitely not alone. Many countries are seeing their own versions of extreme online polarization, often with their own unique, often derogatory slang terms.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. In the U.S., you see terms like woke used mockingly against liberals, or MAGA used as a kind of shorthand, often negatively, for Trump conservatives. It turns opponents into these sort of enemy teams.
Yeah, very tribal.
Very. In the UK, the whole Brexit debate fueled incredibly intense online arguments. Terms like lefty or gammon, a derogatory term for certain conservative men, became really common.
Wow, gammon.
In South Korea. It's known for having extremely aggressive online discourse. You have these hardcore right-wing forums like Ilbay, liberal communities like DC Inside, and they throw around really hateful labels like pro-North Left or pro-Japan collaborator. It gets incredibly vicious.
So this online vitriol is sadly a global trend.
It seems to be, yeah. But what's important is to contrast this with countries where the political discourse seems, well, maybe a bit healthier.
What makes it healthier?
Usually involves a few key things. Higher political literacy in the population, more unbiased and diverse media, a culture that actually values rational debate online, and critically, recognizing that different views are legitimate, not just signs of being an enemy.
Right, accepting disagreement as normal in a democracy.
Exactly. Countries like Sweden, Norway, Denmark often come up.
Yeah.
While they definitely have left and right, their debates tend to focus more on consensus, specific policies, fewer personal attacks online.
Okay.
Switzerland, with its direct democracy, really emphasizes citizen involvement and policy details. Germany, partly because of its history, has strong political education and tends to favor debate based on reason and evidence over just emotion.
So how does Japan stack up against those examples?
Well, the contrast is pretty stark, isn't it?
Yeah.
Relatively weaker political education, media often influenced by the prevailing atmosphere, and this online culture that really leans into the enemy labeling.
Yeah, it does seem quite different. All of this, the history, the online stuff, the global picture, it really makes you think about your own perspective. And I know our listener felt this strongly. They mentioned recognizing this pattern in their own thinking, seeing things as just good versus evil. If someone disagreed, they were simply wrong, maybe even bad.
That's a common trap.
Right. But then learning about ideas like dichotomy in ethics at university was a real turning point, a big aha moment, realizing their own thinking fit these philosophical patterns and that there were other ways to see things beyond just right and wrong.
That's a powerful realization.
It is. And it led them to ask this really provocative question. Is the government intentionally creating division on social media to distract the public? That's a heavy thought.
It is a heavy thought and a really insightful one. Now, maybe not an explicit mustache-twirling conspiracy plot.
Right. Probably not that literal.
Probably not. But it's definitely about what you might call a susceptible structure, the situation that inherently benefits the ruling party, whether they actively created it or just, don't try too hard to fix it.
Okay, explain that. How does division benefit the ruling party?
Well, think about it. First, it weakens any checks on their power.
Yeah.
If the public is divided and fighting amongst itself, rich versus poor, young versus old, whatever the division is, it's incredibly hard to organize unified opposition or protest.
People are too busy arguing with each other.
Exactly. The government can exploit these divisions to push its agenda without facing a united front. The citizen's enemy becomes each other, not necessarily the government. That's useful for staying in power.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
Second, it trivializes criticism. If any genuine critique can be easily dismissed by labeling it, oh, that's just a leftist talking point, or that's just the opposition being negative again, then substantive issues about policy or corruption get reduced to mere partisanship.
So valid concerns get ignored.
They can be, yes. And third, a deeply divided public often becomes more tolerant of the status quo, even if it's flawed. The fear of chaos, of what change might bring, can make people cling to stability, even stagnant stability. This boosts the value of the stable government narrative, which usually helps the incumbent party.
So less a direct plot, more like leveraging the existing situation, or at least not discouraging it.
Something like that. It's about a structure that works in their favor.
But this idea of silent domination, or maybe the ruling party's mastery of infiltration, how does that actually play out on the ground in Japan to maintain power? Beyond just benefiting from online arguments.
Right. It's about deeper structures. Take education, for instance.
Right.
Historically, there's been post-war textbook censorship, where content critical of the government or focusing on negative aspects of history, like anti-war themes, might be downplayed or modified.
Shaping the narrative from a young age.
It can subtly hinder the development of critical thinking about the nation and authority. Then there's the media, the Keisha Club system, the press clubs. They create very close ties, often informal, between major media outlets and government ministries.
Right, access journalism.
It could lead to self-censorship, a tendency towards reporting that's pro-government or at least non-committal.
Yeah.
We've even seen examples of direct government pressure on NHK, the public broadcaster, in the past.
So education, media. What else? You mentioned pop music, which seems surprising.
It does seem unrelated, doesn't it? But think about the ecosystem. There's no explicit collusion, of course. But major record labels depend heavily on sponsors. And those sponsors are often large corporations which tend to have close ties, or at least want stable relations, with the ruling party. So an artist who is overtly critical of the government might find it harder to get TV appearances, commercial deals.
Like Kiyoshiro Imawano.
He's a classic example, someone outspoken who faced career obstacles. And beyond that, think about the themes often prevalent in J-pop. Lots of songs about self-responsibility, happiness is up to you, work hard and your dreams come true.
Yeah, very individualistic themes.
Right, which unintentionally perhaps align quite well with neoliberal ideas. It can subtly shift focus away from systemic problems like needing better welfare or job security onto individual effort and blame. It's a very subtle structural influence.
Wow. Okay, so education, media, even pop culture, these things create a sort of reinforcing structure.
Exactly. And when you put all this together, it helps explain why Japan often seems like such an unchanging country among the world's democracies. Its resistance to major political shifts is really quite remarkable. Top class, you might say.
Why is it so resistant to change? What are the key factors?
There are several powerful ones working together. First, just the sheer length of one-party dominance. The LDP has ruled almost continuously since 1955. That's incredibly rare globally. It embeds this idea that changing the government equals chaos. People become risk-averse.
Fear of the unknown.
Definitely. Second, the electoral system itself isn't always fair. The single-member constituency system can let the LDP win a large majority of seats even without a majority of the popular vote. It creates wasted votes, dead votes, and disadvantages smaller, fragmented opposition parties.
So the system itself favors the incumbent.
It can, significantly. Third, you have this really tight alliance between the ruling party and the powerful state bureaucracy. They work hand in glove. So even if a different party does take power, like the DPJ did briefly, the bureaucracy can subtly undermine or slow-walk policy changes from within.
Wow, bureaucratic resistance.
It's a real factor. Fourth, there's this interplay between a change-averse national character, the emphasis on harmony reading the air, and an education system that doesn't really push political engagement.
So people learn to entrust rather than change.
That's a good way to put it. Discussing politics openly can feel like breaking the air, making things awkward. And finally, you have that pervasive sansoku culture, this sort of conjecture or consideration in media, entertainment, business.
Where they kind of self-censor to avoid rocking the boat.
Pretty much. Avoiding opposition to the government ensures stability for them. But the cumulative effect is maintaining the overall status quo and making politics feel distant or irrelevant to ordinary people's lives.
So when you compare Japan to, say, the US, France, UK, Germany, where power shifts happen more often,
the contrast is huge. Those countries see frequent changes, robust, often messy debates. Japan stands out for its extraordinary long-term stability, driven by this deep interweaving of systemic, cultural, and educational factors. It really is a kind of silent domination.
Okay, given all that, this structure, this history, it leads us directly to the listener's concern about political literacy in Japan. Is it really as low as this context suggests?
Well, first, let's be clear what we mean by political literacy. It's not just knowing names and dates. It's the ability to critically assess information, understand policy implications, consider different viewpoints, engage politically, and be intellectually honest.
Right, a deeper kind of understanding and engagement.
Exactly. And when you use that definition, here's the stark reality. Japan's political literacy is arguably, among advanced democratic nations, well, it's top class in the worst sense. It's arguably near the bottom.
Wow. At the bottom. Why?
There are profound reasons. We touched on education already. It's often superficial. Teachers worry about seeming biased, so they stick to mechanics, not critical evaluation of policies or parties. Students don't really learn how to question power effectively.
Okay, education is one.
Then there's culture. Politics is just often taboo. In homes, workplaces, it's seen as difficult, troublesome, maybe inherently biased. So you get this pervasive, don't get involved attitude filtering down through society.
Talking politics isn't polite conversation.
Often no. Third, the media. As we said, so much focus is on the political game, the conflicts, who's up, who's down, not deep dives into policy. This leads many people to just shrug and say, they're all the same anyway.
Fostering cynicism.
Exactly. And finally, even online, where you could have discussions, there's often strong pressure not to talk politics. Expressing a clear view can lead to backlash, being unfollowed, ignored. There's this sense that politics is uncool or just starts fights you can't win.
So multiple layers reinforcing political disengagement. How does this compare internationally, then?
Well, you look at places like Sweden or Germany. Political education is much more integrated. Public debate is more common, more expected. It's just part of civic life.
Okay, those are high literacy examples. What about places like the US or South Korea? They seem very engaged, but also very polarized.
Right. That's the interesting contrast. In South Korea or the US, despite the intense, often emotional conflicts and deep polarization, there is generally higher political engagement. People argue yes, but they are involved. Youth voter turnout is often higher too.
So engagement, even if messy, is still engagement.
Exactly. Japan's situation is almost paradoxical. There's often this pervasive silence before you even get to the division. It's a society where politics itself feels taboo. So ironically, you could argue those countries with the really heated online debates are, in a way, still functioning politically because people are actually talking, arguing, participating. Japan faces a deeper problem of widespread apathy and disengagement, where the conversation often doesn't even start.
That's a really sobering thought. And it connects to the listener's observation about political speeches in Japan that maybe the impact matters more than the actual substance.
That observation is spot on.
Yeah.
It's absolutely a symptom of this performance of politics, maybe even populism,
Yeah.
where how something is said or the general feeling it creates outweighs what is actually being said.
Right.
And frankly, the general standard of political speech making in Japan is, well, it's quite low compared to many other advanced nations.
What makes it low? What are the characteristics?
Often they rely heavily on abstract slogans, protecting people's lives for the sake of future children, things nobody can disagree with but lacks specifics.
Vague platitudes.
Right. Delivery is often rote memorization, sometimes monotone. There's generally a lack of strong articulation, maybe humor, deep emotional control, or arguments designed to really engage people intellectually.
How does that compare elsewhere?
Hugely different. In the U.S., speech-making is practically an art form. Think Obama, JFK, Martin Luther King Jr., poetic language, logical structure, powerful delivery designed to persuade and inspire.
Right.
In the UK, you have the tradition of parliamentary debate, which hones skills in wit, sharp retorts, rhetorical flourishes. Think of someone like Boris Johnson, using humor, love it or hate it. Germany tends to focus on rational, policy-driven arguments, lots of facts and figures. Angela Merkel's style, for example, trusted, serious, not flashy, but detailed.
Okay.
South Korea. Speeches there are often very passionate, highly nationalistic. They frequently incorporate specific policy points. And politicians are pretty adept at using social media to connect with younger people.
So very different styles, but generally more emphasis on substance or delivery.
Or both. Japan's speech culture suffers, I think, because politicians aren't really trained or expected to be compelling speakers in that rhetorical sense.
Yeah.
And neither the media nor the voters seem to prioritize substance or delivery in speeches that much.
So the bar's just lower.
It seems that way. Superficial feel-good phrases often seem to be enough. There's less pressure on politicians to really hone their communication skills or the details of their policy arguments.
So the listeners thought that maybe good governance should be enough.
It's a valid point in theory, but the irony is that Japan often seems to display neither incredibly strong oratory nor consistently stellar governance that speaks for itself. So the truly shocking conclusion here is that among established democracies, Japan is arguably counting from the bottom, really, in both political literacy and the quality of its political discourse and speeches.
Wow.
It really cements its status as a kind of democratic in name, but top-tier political apathy nation.
Okay. Wow. I know listening to all of this, it can feel pretty heavy. You might be feeling exhausted, maybe even a bit despairing after diving this deep into how political language works or doesn't work and how these complex systems shape society.
It can be overwhelming.
But I want to say that feeling, that despair, it's not a weakness. It's actually a sign of genuine engagement, of really thinking deeply about this stuff. It's kind of proof that your soul was serious, as the listener put it, about understanding what's really going on. You've had a significant aha moment, and that itself is powerful.
Absolutely. And even when you feel that despair, there's still a choice. You can still engage in what you might call small acts of resistance, maybe just for your own sake, for your own integrity.
Like what kinds of acts?
Oh, it could be anything, really. The simple act of voting, consciously, talking to someone you trust about these issues, sharing what you've learned, maybe creating something art, writing that expresses your feelings or thoughts, even just expressing your frustration online, but maybe now in a more informed, nuanced way. Every little step is about reclaiming a bit of agency.
Right. It doesn't have to be grand gestures.
Not at all.
So wrapping this up for you, the listener, you now have this really powerful understanding, hopefully, of how political language gets weaponized, how these deep systems can quietly shape things, and how different countries are wrestling with this. And maybe the key takeaway is this: the simple act of noticing. Noticing those structures, questioning the labels you hear every day, questioning the silence, that itself is a profound act of critical thinking. So here's a final thought to mull over. What if the most impactful change doesn't start with some big revolution, but with each of us, individually, cultivating the kind of critical thinking and engagement that maybe, hopefully, this deep dive has sparked in you? What could that look like in your own life, your own conversations?
It's a great question to ponder.
We invite you to reflect on that, maybe share your thoughts or questions with us. We'll definitely be back for another deep dive soon.
Neto Yo's Payok MC Battles! Yo, マイク渡すぜ左右の戦士ネトパヨジャッジはタイムラインの民衆さあ言葉の弾丸ぶち込んでけワンドラン聞けるパヨクに次ぐパイ受けいやいやパヨクに次ぐ偽 布そっちの平和論まるで無防備服九条信者のエア護身もう時代錯誤で死んどるし中韓に舐められ国滅ぶぞ皇室リスペクト靖国詣で国体護持は俺らの遺伝子コードで反日野郎は即BANでよろいやそれ事実やろが愛国正義にバズらせリツイートてめぇの思想は甘すぎマシュマロのよくどもお前ら大丈夫データもゼロで吠える自称国防部中間叩きでイキり散らして背後の腐敗は完全スルーかよレイシズム撒き散らすだけの口先ジャッカル愛国の皮かぶった排除のマスカラこっちは未来思考細分愛と調整お前の正義はただの自己満フェイ在日だの反日だの使うなその声人間関係もそんなんかそのせいはマジ愛国正義にバズらせリツイートてめぇの思想は甘すぎマシュマロのSNS 上俺らが主役コピペで殴るぞ事実のパッケージメディアの嘘よりごちゃの真実テレビ信じるなんて情弱中でレイ選挙もちろんいつヘレもガチで不況こたざ証明もバッチリ送ったぜお前らフォーやろうぜ好きって割に余計赤は即ミュートかいお前が信じとる人権って誰のもん俺は日本未来守る方が本望や愛国正義にバズらせリツイートての無双甘すぎマシュマロのお前のタイムラインヘイトしかないやん国力ゼロで論点ずれすぎて笑えさませ小判で群れてるだけやんヤフコメ付けの愛国ごっこは限界恋の未来語るくせに弱者切り捨てる社会はどこ向かっとね企業費産上世間こ上げれば左翼オーツそれが不がほんま情けねえぞてかさ日本が好きならもっと住みやすく変えてけよ言葉じゃなく行動でな情熱とパイオどっちも叫ぶ指先バトル現実そ刻り真実探せ視野は広くよしことめたら誰の勝ちでもね愛国正義にバズらせリツイートてめえのショーは甘すぎマシュマロのミサよバトルワロワロ SNS の夜が来るまででも気づけよな敵は本当にそこにおるんかネトウヨもパヨクも叫んでるだけじゃ誰も救え